back on player season reviews. Caitlin Cooper and I teaming up to talk about 2023-24 for several Pacers players. Today, just two, looking at some shooting guards in Bennedict, Mathurin, and Ben Sheppard. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're talking shooting guards, player season recaps with Caitlin Cooper, looking at two off-ball guards in Ben Mathurin and Ben Sheppard. The Bens, as you know, when we do these series, it's one stat, one clip, and one over-under to either define the player's most recent series or look ahead with the information that we talk about. I had the Ben Sheppard assignment. Caitlin had the Bennedict Mathurin assignment. If you'd like to see the clips, her Patreon's the way to go, and they'll in way more detail there. She has lots of write-ups. And our next one of these will be the centers. That will be coming, I believe, on Friday of this week as we push on. Hope you guys enjoyed this one as we talk about the Bens looking back at 2023-24 with Caitlin Cooper. Pacers player season reviews number 2. And I came with homework this time because last time Caitlin and I did this, Caitlin said, I wonder when we finished doing this series last year. Well, the answer, Caitlin, was May 6th. Today, we're on episode 2 on June 10th because the Pacers season was just a wee bit different. May 9th, excuse me. So we're over a month later into the year with many episodes to go, which says a lot about how the Pacers season went, which gives us more to talk about with these players as we proceed. Today, we're getting into the Bens, but isn't it weird that we're still in June, looking back on a season that ended 13 days ago that Derek White has to address on TV after a finals game?
I'm thinking that at this time last year, I was probably like writing an article about Bobby Clintman. I'm guessing. I bet that's about what I was too. I was just like enveloped in watching college games every day of my life.
I still have all my tape from last year. I bet I was on like Cam Whitmore now. I'm not sure. I did all the lottery guys, which was a waste of time in retrospect. I do not miss doing draft stuff. I don't know what I should do this year. I feel like I can't do nothing, but I am way behind. Today, Caitlin and I are doing the Bens, which is what we're calling shooting guards. You could put Andrew Nembhard in this category if you wanted to. We don't want to. We're going to include him with TJ McConnell and Tyrese Haliburton. So today is Bennedict Mathurin and Ben Sheppard, two young guards who are very drastically different in the way that they play. And we have to talk about their differences today. And afterwards, if you didn't see it, you need to, because one, I'm very happy that my clip has Caitlin annotations on it, but two, it's a very fantastic read. Caitlin puts all this on her Patreon basketball she wrote with way more dialogue on everything we talk about, more details, more nuance. Do you have anything to add to what I just said about what you were also doing?
I think you're probably better at plugging it than I am. I do a very poor job of plugging myself. I recorded a YouTube series throughout the entirety of the playoffs, and I think I only mentioned that I had a blog maybe twice. I'm so used to it being behind a paywall and me just speaking to the specific people that subscribe to it that I was very bad at introducing myself, introducing my co-host, and letting the public know, hey, I actually do this for a living. Here's where you can go read it.
Yes, it's fantastic. I get all of them straight to my inbox. And actually, they get starred because then they go to my read list, which is my terrible way of organizing things I want to read. Today, we're doing Ben Sheppard and Ben Mathurin. Mathurin was Caitlin's assignment. Sheppard was mine. And we will start with Mr. Sheppard, Mr. Low Mistakes Man, which is going to be a theme today. Caitlin, where would you like to start? Because I think any of these could be revealing. I have what I would like to start with, but if you have somewhere you'd like to go, let me know.
I'm the guest. I will defer to how you would like to start, Tony.
Great. My one stat. Oh, we didn't do the structure either. The way we do this for every player is one stat that talks and says a lot about their season and their future. One clip that says something about what they do well or don't do well and do better. And one over-under, largely looking forward, sometimes looking back, that can be revealing about the trajectory of this player. I will start with my one stat for Ben Sheppard, and that is 0. And that is the number of mistakes he attempts to make in every game. Not that any player tries to make mistakes, but my real stats are 7 stats that add up to that 0 mistakes he tries to make in a game. For example, 5.9 is the first stat. That's Ben Sheppard's turnover rate last season. Extremely low. Not that he does a lot of risky things, but that's fantastic. Second stat, That is 81.5%. That is the number of fouls Ben Sheppard had that were either shooting fouls or loose ball fouls, aka fouls that are like normal and fine and not stupid mistakes. He had 0 clear path fouls, 0 take fouls, and 0 defensive 3 in the key fouls last season. Ben Sheppard took 1 3 all season. You can consider this a good or bad thing, but for the sake of my argument, we'll get here. He took 1 3 all season that was either tight or very tight coverage as classified by NBA.com's tracking, aka he does not take bad shots. Ben Sheppard has the opposite of young guy fouls. He doesn't take bad shots. He doesn't turn the ball over. Some of that is a low risk style of play. Some of that is that he is a very successful and good player, and that all adds up very quickly when you're trying to find minutes and trying to fit it on a team. And that was all extremely valuable for him this past season.
I think the theme of this episode will likely be how different these two players are in almost every single facet, because I think you can almost, as you've pointed out with all of those numbers, you can almost never fault Ben Sheppard for not melding to and adhering to the team concept on both ends of the floor. Almost to a fault, though.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like in my head, you read that I saw he took 0 tight threes, or excuse me, 0 very tight contested threes and 1 tight. And that's good, I guess. But at the same time, it's like, maybe take a few, you're a decent shooter, get them up, same with the turnovers. Like, do you want to take no risky passes and try to throw someone open ever? Like, what do you feel like the right line is? Or does it kind of come as you grow as a player? Because O'Shea Brissett was kind of like this to me too, where he was kind of a low mistakes kind of guy, but a lot of, for lack of a better term, safer plays, if that makes sense.
I think probably the best area of the floor where this stands out, this dichotomy for Ben Sheppard, is in the corners, because he catches a lot of skip passes in the corners, whether from Tyrese or from TJ McConnell. He rarely starts a lot of possessions above the break. And typically the Pacers, when they throw that skip pass, that's going to automatically trigger the extra pass. And that's a great way to punish an X out rotation on the weak side, which is what Ben Sheppard aims to do. But almost every time when he catches that skip pass, a lot of times you'll see that his eyes aren't even up on the rim. Like, he's already looking to his side, to the wing, to automatically throw the swing. So I looked it up, and he threw 76 passes out of the corners this season, and he attempted 83 corner threes. So he almost passed the ball out of the corners more than he shot corner threes. And I think that kind of applies around. I think sometimes in games where he's missed a couple threes, it shows up more. I definitely think he can be a little bit gun shy. That's why the game that he played up in Toronto, where he hit that, one dribble pump, had to recapture his rhythm 3, that was a really big shot in the fourth quarter, I felt was like a standout moment for him, because sometimes he has space and he doesn't always read the short closeout, and he's already moving the ball on, which I'm sure his teammates love playing with him because of this, because he's very, like I said, almost to a fault, willing to play within the team scheme and the team system. But that leaves some opportunities on the floor for him. And sometimes that isn't the right read because of what the defense is doing.
And that's why what Tyrese Haliburton said hit so hard. He said, we literally bullied him. Like, dude, shoot. We trust you. We're giving you the ball. Shoot. It's okay. And I get why when you're like, this is funny. When Aaron Holiday was a rookie, I sometimes wondered the opposite. Like, if you're playing with Aaron Holiday as a Pacers teammate, he got better at this. But in his rookie specifically, like, he would come in and take 3 shots in a row, like instantly. Right. If you're a vet, you're like, dude, chill, let's work together here. I think Sheppard can be the opposite sometimes, where it's maybe too much the other way. But if he is trying to fit in and make positive plays, passing is not by default a negative thing. So I understand him thinking that way, but I also understand the team. And this is kind of a Carlisleism too. Like, if he puts you out there, he trusts you to shoot largely with this team that I don't think it was really like bullying, but I like Tyrese's word, bullied him into shooting. And you could see his attempt rate go up throughout the season too. So I do wonder what that next means for, his aggressiveness, for lack of a better term, as a passer, or how that works in with fouls and plays like that on defense. He is a pretty aggressive defender. He's just a very smart fouler. So I think it's very good that he's a low mistakes player. Carlisle's talked about that, but I do wonder how that grows out with experience in the future.
Right, because you don't want to snuff out the passing completely, because that's an important thing for a shooter, number one, and also because he's very capable of continuing advantages, and perhaps once the shot, if it starts falling at a more reliable clip, because this isn't something that we touched on. I think, what did he shoot on catch and shoot threes? Like 31%. Like, if those shots start falling more often and he's being aggressively run off the line, then his ability to walk the tightrope, or sometimes as he does, he's a pretty decent connective passer under the basket. He can make passes with either hand. keep the ball moving. Like, those aren't things that you completely want to tamp out. You just want him to make the correct read based on what the defensive coverage is, instead of being as unselfish as he tends to default to.
What we're saying is Ben Sheppard should only pass and never pass to the other team. That would make him a very good player, I think. Hey guys, short little break so we can talk about FanDuel. Summertime is here, and that means baseball, Phillies, rolling, the NBA Finals, NHL playoffs is almost over, but rolling, and plenty more. You can bet on it all on FanDuel right now. New customers over on FanDuel get $200, $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVPs to who's going to hit one out of the park, goal scores, everything on FanDuel. They've got your faves, the props, the over-unders, the everything. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon for that offer. $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Get a big win onto your summer bucket list. FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Yeah, and it's so natural in my head to think that his three-point percentage will be better than that. I have no reason to think that. Like, his sample size isn't huge, but he just shot well in college and has good form. Like, yeah, better, right? So what does that look like in the future? I don't know, but for getting a rookie onto the floor and for being a rotation player in the conference finals as a 26th pick, that's the kind of guy he had to be, and he did it very well and clearly got better at a lot of this stuff throughout the season. My clip thing is maybe, to me, the most additive thing Ben Sheppard does in games, and that is screen navigation. This dude is so hard to screen, and he's good at sticking with and containing who happens to have the ball when he's guarding the ball in pick and roll ball handling situations. Synergy has it that last year he was in the 81st percentile as a pick and roll ball handler defender. And in these clips, there's a lot of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them chronologically like I did last time, but you can see them on Kalen's Patreon. And the reason I'm talking about them broadly is the theme of who he's guarding doesn't exist. And I think that's what makes this impressive. Chris Middleton in one, in a different kind of action than Paul George in the next. Tyler Hero pulling up for a three in a different one. Jalen Brunson running through a maze of Isaiah Hartenstein threes in another one. So sometimes it's a star guard who handles the ball a lot. Sometimes it's a wing who's catching the ball away from the play. Sometimes it's Tyler Hero who's about to shoot a three. One time it's Dennis Schroeder, just because that one was like the perfect encapsulation of everything. So he said, when I asked him at the end of the season, like, when did you kind of know that you could hang, like you could be in the rotation? He said, when they'd call me in to guard really good players, right? And a lot of these clips, that's happening, and he's getting screened, and he's not scooting over him every time. He's got a different technique to get through it, whether it's spinning under, sliding over, whatever. He never is dead on a screen. That is so valuable, even if you're not necessarily like the most deterrent on-ball guy ever, just to be in the way and be a threat. I thought he was very good at that this season and can only get better because it was his first year in the league.
I like that you mentioned the different techniques, because he's a defender who doesn't just stay skinny, and I don't want to oversell or undersell that, because I think it's valuable that, like, you have that clip in there against Tyler Hero. He goes under and he can still surge out. Having defenders that can cut off and beat a defender to a spot and still contest the pull-up three is incredibly valuable. The one against Jalen Brunson's the #1 guard in the NBA at rejecting screens. He uses a lot of really staccato movements, and Ben Sheppard not only, he beats him to the spot on the rejection, which is incredibly hard to do. He was one of the players in the Eastern Conference Finals, like very few that I noticed, was actually actively trying to force Jalen Brunson to his right in those games and funneling him into the help at the nail. And so being able to show all of those different techniques, in addition to actually going over and still cutting off the driving angle and contesting a pull-up. I also do think, though, that overall, I like him better when he is the on-ball point of attack defender. I think that that's his best defensive role, and that's what all those clips are unifying, which obviously you looked at that at Synergy when you wanted to talk about what his numbers were against the pick-and-roll ball handler. But the other numbers you can look at bear it out. I mean, it's not as many high volume of picks, but when Ben Sheppard's defending the ball handler with Myles Turner behind him, the Pacers gave up 0.837 points per chance. That's compared, again, there's going to be a lot of compare and contrast. When that's Bennedict Mathurin, it's 1.121 points per chance. So I think that in part because Sheppard has shown that he can be a viable part of the rotation, the thing that benefits Ben is when you have Ben Sheppard, when you have Andrew Nembhard, and you have TJ McConnell, there's not going to really be much need for Bennedict Mathurin to have to be doing this anymore. which I think is to the value of, pretty much the team as a whole defensively, if you're not having to have as much Bennedict Mathurin at the point of attack. Because the other clip that you have in there that I should have brought up and mentioned another technique-wise is the one against Boston. He's chasing over and he veer switches into Al Horford, and then also boxes out Al Horford. Like, Ben Sheppard has a decent amount of functional strength. He did that against Walker Kessler earlier in the season too, where he swam and fronted the post, and being able to do that against bigs. And that's probably the number one area where Ben struggles in his screen navigation. It's not just pressing up into the ball, it's that he oftentimes veers way too early. They don't want to trigger that until the ball breaks the free throw line. If you trigger it, if you start to veer switch into the screener before the ball breaks the free throw line, then you're putting Myles Turner in a really bad spot because he's having to come up out of the drop coverage to contest that ball handler. The roller's getting loose behind him. And there were times where you could often see, like, if people are watching this on YouTube, you could watch Myles and he'd be like, funnel the ball to me. Like, you have to stay on until they get to here. And you could see those types of demonstrative gesturing. And I won't say that Ben's on-ball defense was always completely pristine. But again, you can rarely fault him for not playing within the scheme and executing the coverage, I think is the way that I would term it.
Yeah, that was by far his best play type defensively, to your point about his on-ball defense always being pristine. But you said something there that I want to ask you about, and that is specifically the type of player that he is guarding in the future. Just because he's 6'6", do you think there's any route or way, if it's adding strength or something, that he could become a pretty viable wing option? Or do you feel like mostly because of his foot speed and some of the stuff we just talked about with his ability to get around screens, that it's mostly going to be ball handlers who are in that kind of role more often?
I mean, I think he had the highest average speed on defense of anybody on the Pacers, and it was one of the higher marks in the NBA. So when he's doing like team defense coverages, like, they blitz, he helps with the low man, he has to X out and recover. Like, he's able to cover ground really quickly. He holds his ground decently. The problem is that, like, I'm sure everybody can remember, in the Eastern Conference Finals, Tatum was going at Ben Sheppard a fair amount in games 3 and 4, and he just couldn't contest those shots. Like, I didn't think that his defense was necessarily poor. It was similar to watching Andrew Nembhard against Jalen Brunson. Nembhard just didn't have the length with the degree of separation that Jalen Brunson's able to create to make that a viable matchup. And I think it's similar sometimes when Ben Sheppard's asked to guard up a position, which then makes it interesting with the bench, because you're obviously not going to move TJ McConnell off the point of attack for Ben Sheppard to do that, even though that's Ben Sheppard's best role, in my opinion. And also why it kind of fit in the Eastern Conference Finals in games 3 and 4, because you could throw Ben Sheppard out there against Derek White, let Nembhard and Nesmith guard the wings. We could probably point out why wasn't Pascal Siakam guarding these wings. But point being is Ben Sheppard could guard.
Bring that up every episode in some capacity. I have.
We probably will, but it made it easier for Ben to do what Ben does best, I guess is what I would say. It's harder to do that when he's out there with TJ, but obviously he's most likely going to remain out there with TJ. So,
yeah, I agree. And it's very natural to just be like, 6'6" guy, he can guard wings, but I'm not sure that is where he'll go. And he's 190 pounds right now, right? Like, he's a rookie in the NBA. We'll see what kind of body transformation he goes through. But even Aaron Nesmith, who's much stronger but is shorter, he has some size limitations at times too. So I wonder where that trends with him and within the context of the Pacers, which takes us to our over-under. And this is something I wonder about. This is sort of related to what we talked about with mistakes and what he does very well and what he's learning to do on offense. My over-under for next season with Ben Sheppard is 2. That is, do you think he drives to the basket more or less than 2 times per game next season? Last year, the number was at 1.2. When he would get run off the line, he would often pass, to the points we just made earlier when we were talking about the way he plays and the decisions he makes when he is closed out in certain areas of the court. That is a shockingly low number of drives per game, fewer than Myles Turner, Jordan Nwora, Obi Toppin, way fewer than other kind of shooter types like Aaron Nesmith's at 4.5. Can Ben Sheppard get to 2 or 3? I think that would be his next skill progression offensively to kind of blend his skills together. What say you?
It's even like his rate of no dribble layups is also fairly low as well. Like, he's a decent cutter, but once he catches the ball as a cutter, he doesn't trust his explosiveness to finish, and he will oftentimes try to make the connective pass, like I referenced under the basket. So, I mean, I guess some of this depends on minutes. If he's averaging a few more minutes, it's more likely that he might get a couple more drives, but I don't know that I necessarily see that area of his game popping off in the near-term future, mainly because I think I guess one area where he might get more of those is in transition. He finishes okay in transition when he runs out and gets a hit-ahead pass. So it's possible that if he's playing more minutes and with certain groups and he's the person leading the break and running, he might catch more of those. But in the half court, I don't think I'm necessarily going to expect it.
I bring it up because we talked about well, maybe not specifically driving, but being able to wiggle past someone with a dribble or two meant for Aaron Nesmith and his growth from shooter to more versatile offensive player. And maybe it doesn't have to be year 1 to year 2, but when, if ever, does that come for Ben Sheppard and what he already is able to do on the offensive end? That always seems like such a natural, like thing 1 to thing 2, but he is already good at a lot of other stuff that we've already talked about. So it's very generalized to me, but if it's, my defender ran right by me, there's a ton of space in front of me. Am I looking for a cutter or am I looking to go to the rim? Right? How does the game slow down and evolve for him in those reads? I think that's a very interesting part of his next steps offensively.
I think that that's fair. I think that my main things for him just in year 2 is if he can be, and I always struggle to do it because I don't like grand unified theories of basketball and I don't like making overarching statements about this is a type of player that works in the playoffs. But I do think that there's like 2 archetypes of players that are almost always going to work in the playoffs, which is a 2 guard who can run offense and guard, aka Nemhard. Also movement shooters who can guard ones, like a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, like a Danny Green, typically are valuable rotation players in the playoffs. I think that's what I'm aiming, and I'm guessing the Pacers are probably aiming for Ben Sheppard to be for them. So I'm kind of more keeping an eye on, which this does bode well in his favor. The numbers with Ben Sheppard as a screener for TJ McConnell were quite good. As I talked about when we did the Doug McDermott info, Ben Sheppard's more like Buddy Hield in that he prefers to move to his left as a shooter, which pairs well with both TJ and Tyrese Haliburton. So I'm kind of going to be more keeping an eye on those particular numbers.
Wow. So Kaylin's suggestion is the starting 5 has both TJ, Tyrese, and Ben Sheppard next season. Very interesting. I'm not really sure how that will work in concept, but we can get there. Should we move to Ben number 2?
Let's move to Bennedict Mathurin.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, some big and some small. We want to keep them bottled up. It can start to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. Therapy has many uses for everyone who can benefit from learning positive coping skills, learning how to set boundaries. It'll empower you to be the best version of yourself. And it is not just for people who have experienced major trauma. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. To get matched with a licensed therapist, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
I think that the best place to start with him is I'm going to go to the Clips. So I actually went to the offensive end of the floor for Ben. This was Ben's best game of the year up in against the Raptors. And this is the one where he was hitting, shots over 2 defenders, incredible shot-making game. But I also thought this was one of his most standout moments. So it's in semi-transition. He sees that TJ McConnell's filling the wing, and he does a no-look jump pass to Jalen Smith. And I swear to you, I didn't just pick this because it was a jump pass. But it shifts the defense slightly. And then when Jalen can't finish the shot, Ben keeps moving and cuts. Then he notices that Kelly Olynyk's rotating to the rim. So instead of trying to force the ball up over against the help, he makes the kick out to TJ McConnell. Then he respaces himself in the dunker spot for Tyrese Haliburton to make a drop-off pass. And then he astutely finishes a reverse layup on the other side of Kelly Olynyk's rim protection. The reason why I wanted to point that out, and this has not been linear for Ben, obviously this one happened toward the end of what was his season versus the other clip that I've included here happened, within the first 10 games or so. But this is also in semi-transition with Bruce Brown as the ball handler. Ben catches it, filling the lane at the corner. He immediately drives, doesn't use the snug pick and roll close enough around Myles Turner, so he never actually sheds Tyrese Maxey. And en route to this drive, Bruce Brown's standing with his hands open. Tobias Harris is all the way off of Obi Toppin in the corner, and Ben decides that he is going to try to beat the help and gets blocked by Tyrese Maxey in rearview pursuit. And that feels like the best compare and contrast for who Ben is as a player and also where the inflection points were between his rookie and his sophomore season. As I said on the last pod, I don't think he's solely the same rookie who, though it showed in that clip, only sees obstacles as scoring opportunities, but it's still happening more than you'd like. So his rim field goal percentage dropped from 59% to 53%. Obviously, his free throw attempt rate also dropped from 47% to 32.8%. And the big one is his pass out percentage on drives is still 24.5%. That's better than last year when it was 18.1%. But like the only people that have lower pass out rates than that are like Joel Embiid, Jaren Jackson Jr., Kelly Oubre. Like this is TJ Warren territory of like scoring no matter what, where you still need Ben. And I don't even think it's necessarily fair to say, bullheaded as much as he just doesn't always have a wide enough passing vision to recognize where those kick out avenues are. Still not necessarily able to make live dribble passes with his left hand when he's somebody who aggressively wants to drive to the left. And this all compounded and impacted his rim field goal percentage. But the broader point that I wanted to show there is in both clips, those are not out of set plays. And that's the area where Ben needs to grow the most. We know that he's capable of bringing the ruckus to patterned offense in a good way. Sometimes you need somebody that's going to be like, hey, we're not getting anything out of this play. The offense is slowed down. I can disrupt it. But he also needs to be somebody who can meld to unpatterned offense. And that's what he doesn't show often enough. And why that play against Toronto, I felt was like, hey, this is the stepping stone that he needs to be able to build off of this and know where to move, where to pass in relation to things that are not drawn out for him and when the shot isn't specifically for him.
Hey, you've been all over the play calls for Ben Mathurin versus non-play call stuff for forever. It's very interesting to think about his last season to me because I've said to people, like, I feel like he's gotten better at a lot of the stuff that in my head he needed to, but how much better is kind of the question, because he has moments like the one you highlight against Toronto. You talked about it on Low Post recently, but like that game in Detroit, everybody remembers very well, where his passing was awesome and like they needed everything he gave. They didn't play very well that night, but he was really good. And you go through all that and you think, great, like this guy is getting better at reading the game and like understanding when he needs to be the finisher versus the setup man. And then you look at the end of the season, and this is just statistical and does not actually require watching games, which we all did. But his assists are up a little. His passes per game, which he played fewer minutes, so it's a little different. But last year was 24, and this year is 26.3. Right, 2 more. It's not like he's zipping it around all of a sudden. And his potential assists last year was, this year was 3.1. Last year was 2.8. Like it's not like he was so much different as a creator this year than last year on average. Even though it felt like there were pockets of those moments that made you go, yeah, there was progress there. Yeah, there was progress there, but it wasn't all the time, and it wasn't every game. And I wonder why that's the case. Like if he goes into a game thinking about it more, if there's a specific level of focus, if it's something about the way he's covered when he gets to the rim, or who's out there as the shooters in the corner, or how his feel with them kind of works. I kind of wonder in his head what shifts from game to game to make that the case, where some nights it looks like, oh, yes, this is better. This is what the Pacers need him to be, where he's blending what he is and what they hope he is, versus some nights where it's just who he is, and sometimes it works out. But that's what I have kind of wondered for a long time, is what is the difference between those two nights, and why is that the case for him more often than other players?
I think it's also somewhat telling that he improved in a necessary area and that he was more accurate as a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I think that number was like, 38%.
Yep.
And he saw a lower rate of short closeouts because of that. And he's still a player who's very much wired to catch and drive first. He's going to catch and shoot later once he realizes, like, okay, now I know that I have space. He's typically going to put the ball on the floor first before he does that. But the point being is he still saw help on over 80% of his drives. So teams are still very much communicating, we are going to load up on you as a driver because we have every incentive to, because you're not likely to pass it here. And then hence why his rim field goal percentage has dropped. Some of that is also because there are times where he kind of wants to overcomplicate finishes in areas where he doesn't need to. But as far as like the reads coming and going, I think that, some of that's just growing pains, growth spurts, and he's a low field player. Like that's somewhat the reality. Like when you watched him at Arizona ran set plays for him. He was the best player on the team. He knew these shots are for me. And oftentimes, like he didn't consider, what the best shot for the team was, because the best shot for the team probably was for him to shoot it. In most cases with the Pacers, some of the times when you see the inflection points, like the game against Detroit, they ran 4 plays in a row. And because he was playing next to TJ, they ran that and oriented it more for a second side pick and roll for Ben to make different reads, but he was making reads within a set action. And as we know about the Pacers, they have guidelines in how they play random, but they prefer to play random. So being able to respond and respace the floor in relation to what his teammates are doing is still an area where he's going to need to grow, especially if he's going to return to being a starter, in my opinion.
So what players say and what they do is not always the same, is my preface to this. But what do you make of what he is saying? Because for a lot of his career, I think he has, at least with us, done a good job of recognizing like where he needs to evolve in terms of, I want to be coached hard. I want to become a better defender and team defender. I know I need to be better as a passer. I know my reason to be better. And specifically at his ex interview, the most revealing thing he said to me, and he's hinted at this kind of stuff before, but really directly said, my whole life, and you just alluded to this at Arizona, I was the best player on the team, right? So possessions and me, play call me, and that's fine. That's true for a lot of NBA players, especially ones who are really good in college. And then you hit the NBA, and Tyrese is on your team, and then Tyrese and Pascal are on your team, and there was very little overlap with all three of them available. So I'm not going to like dig into data or anything there, but do you feel like I wonder how much he has truly grasped that and what that will mean for his next summer and how he'll play next year, because that would hit the hardest to me, at least in terms of what he was saying, and I think what it means for his future. And that is right. He does need to realize that and grow his game out from there, but how that looks is TBD. And
this is why it's a delicate balance too, because I remember after he got fouled, which the league later said that it wasn't a foul, on that shot over Kristaps Porzingis on the sideline of bounce play, he told you guys, like, I got the chance to take a game-winning shot. Like, I haven't got to do that when I've been here, really. And what Rick said was true. Like, there's not another player on the roster who could have gotten that shot, and that is a very valuable thing. I don't want people to think that I'm completely downselling Bennedict Mathurin. There are things that he can do on a basketball court that nobody else on this roster can do actively. It's just finding a balance within that and how much can be too much of that in certain circumstances. But I do think that he's grasped it more than he has last year because, like I said, he's making more of an effort to make the right play. He just doesn't always make the right play. Like I remember in the in-season tournament, he saw a short closeout. He immediately put the ball on the floor, and it's like that just needed to be a catch and shoot three. Immediately put the ball on the floor. There was a jump switch, and then he saw the defender in front of him, and he just made a pass right into the guy peeling behind him to the corner. Like he was trying to, like he realized, like I put the ball on the floor, a defender came to me, I got stopped, I'm making a pass, but it was very paint by number. Like I'm trying to make the right play, but I'm still not necessarily reading what the defense actually did here. Like that's somewhat the disconnect from him and why I often refer to it as liminal space, because I do think that he's better than he was as a rookie, despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily show up in the numbers. And that, as Rick mentioned, I do think that he's capable of being a star player. I just don't know if he's going to fully grasp, the star player rung in front of him. He could, because he does have things, like I said, that he can do that are unique that other people on the roster can't do. It's just that the feel thing is real for him on both ends of the floor.
And that's why another interesting chapter of the season, and something we talked about last episode in particular, when looking at what the season was versus what we thought it would be, is a big storyline entering the season, at least to me, was Ty and Ben together. What do you see from this? How much does that partnership develop? And he started for, I can't remember the number now, 12 games, 10. Yeah. And then he went to the bench, and then their team changed, and then he got hurt. And I get why all that matters, but because they were so good, it was a different rubric of what was important. And we didn't see as much of that. And I think it was the right choice in retrospect, but that was a big kind of change of the season and changed what his expectation was supposed to be and changed what he was supposed to do and who he was playing with. So another year of that will be interesting to see too, is how much do they play together? If very much at all, given what, I mean, we said this, like I would right this second expect that next year's starting five will be the same one that closed last season. Right. So still some things to learn about that kind of stuff.
And that's a perfect segue, because the one number was minus 2.41. And that was the net rating with Ben and Tyrese on the floor together. It's been a negative net rating for 2 years in a row. And again, this isn't me trying to pan Ben at all, but he did have the lowest swing net rating of any rotation player on the roster to finish the season. They were worse with him defensively when he was on the floor, and they were worse with him offensively when he was on the floor as well. With regards to he and Tyrese, that was much more a defensive issue than it was an offensive issue. They were giving up, I think, 120 points per 100 when both of them were out there. And that speaks to what you just said, because to me, if I'm the Pacers and I'm looking at it, there's three players who are rock solid in the starting lineup to me, and that would be Tyrese, Nembhard, and Pascal Siakam. The other two are somewhat swing pieces, depending upon what happens with Myles Turner and his contract long term and how you view that position after what we saw in the playoffs. But if you were toggling back and forth between, hey, maybe Ben can play the 3, maybe Ben should be a starter in front of Aaron, I look at games like the one they played against Dallas when Aaron was out and Ben had to guard one of either Kyrie or Luka Doncic. And I'm thinking of Myles doing this. I'm thinking of him being like, you got to funnel the ball to me. And I'm just thinking, unless there's like significant defensive strides, that's going to be tough. And just because I just think it makes more like the adjustments they made to the starting lineup are the ones that made sense because Ben has a lot more freedom with the bench to have potentially play out of sets. He plays well off of TJ McConnell. TJ McConnell leads the league in drives per 100. He leads the league, I believe, in passes per 100 to the corners. That really activates Ben as a cutter. They play off of each other well in transition. Like, it just makes more sense for him to be a focal point of the bench. And like what we just talked about with Ben Sheppard and TJ McConnell, they're both there to defend at the point of attack. Ben doesn't have to do it with that lineup. If he's playing with the starters and you're playing against a team with 2 significant ball handlers, he's going to have to guard one of them. And it gets pretty tricky. Like, and then that speaks to, like, I realize what his off-ball defensive stuff can be as well. Like, that's a whole nother topic where sometimes what his awareness is, like, as good as he was in that game against Toronto, he also gave up a lot off of cuts to Grady Dick and Ochai in that particular game, which is another talking point. But they need to be able to dial up the awareness defensively and the reads offensively for me to be able to definitively say, like, yeah, he's a rock solid starter next year.
So to be clear for people who didn't realize, my exclamation of yes just now is that I nailed the segue, not the number specifically.
Right.
I did say that at a bad time. So correct me if I miss one here, but I like every time they changed the starting 5 last season, they did it for defensive purposes, or at least that was their stated reason for doing so.
Well, the only counter I would have is I remember when we did a podcast last summer and we both were like, how long will it be until Buddy's back in the starting lineup? And I said, I give it to Black Friday.
You gave me till Thanksgiving, right?
And it turns out that is when it happened. And so ahead of the in-season tournament, they swapped Ben and Obi out and put in Aaron and Buddy, effectively returning to last season's starting lineup minus Bruce Brown. And that felt more so somewhat matchup specific to the Atlanta Hawks, but also like this is a game to clinch our group and we have more faith and trust in what the chemistry and combination is between Tyrese and Buddy than we do with the one with Tyrese and Ben. And shortly thereafter, Ben was not in the starting lineup anymore.
That's true. I guess the Ben Buddy part was not defensively focused, but Aaron for Obi was. And Obi and Buddy were amazing that game. And so everything was hunky-dory for one night in Atlanta. But like around Christmas and then obviously trading for Pascal and then how they managed the 2-guard spot after that was all
correct, because it was also right around the same time that Aaron fouled out guarding Jalen Brunson and De'Aaron Fox in back-to-back games. They put Andrew Nembhard back in the starting lineup in place of Buddy. And then Aaron was guarding, more players his own natural position wise.
Why I like that, my generic answer for forever when people would ask about that change too is like with the bench, because like TJ McConnell has been very good for a long time, but like his explosion was really after the All-Star break, right? So the thinking in November, December was like, this still gets Ben the ball more because Tyrese is going to have it so much. And he was one of the best 2-3 offensive players in the league for the first couple months of the season, right? It's like it made sense on balance, but it did take away the aspect of those two players together and what that allows them to grow and allows the Pacers chemistry to do. But they were winning enough that they needed to find ways to win. And that often meant defensive choices in their opening 5.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I didn't look up this number in advance, but that Ben's usage swings pretty significantly when he's on the floor with Tyrese versus when he isn't. Right.
We can look that up while we keep talking. But I nailed it. Look at that segue nailing.
We really kind of did too, because my one over under for this, probably straightforward based on everything we've just talked about, is 19.5. So would you take that over under as game started for Bennedict Mathurin next year?
Oh man. Okay, I'm thinking of if Andrew Nembhard gets hurt, who's going to start the 2? If Aaron Nesmith
let's pretend people are healthy.
Oh, then I'd take the under for sure. I think. Like we know that their starting 5 was a plus in the postseason, right? Like that group clearly fits, even if it's not what they envision as like this is our finished product starting 5 for our championship contending team. Like it works right now pretty dang well, Like I don't see a reason to shake that up. And 3 of the players are 25 and under. Like that you kind of stick with something like that, at least to me.
I mean, and rightfully so. It sounded like from Ben's perspective, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like from Ben's perspective that he's going to do his darndest and work as hard as he can this summer to earn being back as a starter again, which I would expect any player to approach the offseason that way. But yeah, I would take the under as well.
On the same balance as last year, though, like to earn that spot, defense will be important, which is why we talked about the starting lineup changes they made, and why they did it was in large part because of defense. And we laughed about that a little bit, but last year they said the changes would become because of defense and rebounding and effort and things like that. And then those are the changes they made, and they did eventually show that those were the things required to earn minutes. So, and like Ben prides himself on this kind of stuff. Like I remember him very specifically joking when we were learning in training camp last year, one, that they were doing the one-on-one drills. Like he was always very happy with how he defended and did in those because they were practicing guard in the yard. And two, when we were talking to guys about how much they're learning from Bruce Brown defensively, he's like, yeah, I'm better. Like I do think he takes pride in his individual defense, but like expanding that out to a team defense level is the next step for him.
It's more so like two possessions I could tell people to look at is like, here's against a lesser opponent. They're playing the Hornets. And I wrote an article because I was like, this is a good stride from Ben, because he noticed that TJ McConnell had, I believe, PJ Washington on him. And he started motioning like, let me scram you out. Let me scram you out. And I'm like, this is a good recognition. Like he sees that his teammate is in a mismatch situation. He's trying to rectify it. And it didn't end up getting executed perfectly. But I was like, recognition wise, that is good. Yeah. Then they played the Hornets in the atrocious loss before the All-Star break. And Doug McDermott is trying to get him to scram him out. Like Ben basically like dialing 911 for Ben to come help him. And Ben doesn't even recognize that the wing exchange has happened. And then he sagged way off of Grant Williams, I believe, who was the shooter, and just gives up a wide open three. Like it's those types of moments where it's like, okay, I literally just saw you do this against the same opponent, and now it's not happening again. And it's like, if I were the Pacers coaching staff, like you said, like individually in isolation defense, he had some standout moments, like what he did against the Milwaukee Bucks. Like he forced Chris Middleton not to be able to turn over his middle shoulder. He knocked the ball away from Giannis twice, albeit with help from Bruce Brown on the backside. But like, I'd be like wanting to show him that film on a constant loop and be like, there is film of this. We've seen you do it. Because like, that's the thing. Like, it's like what we said when we were cross comparing Jarris and Obi Toppin. Like Jarris still has awareness and recognition things, mistakes that he's going to have to correct on defense, but he doesn't face the same necessarily physical limitations that prevent Obi from doing some of the things that he can't do against switches. Likewise with Ben. Ben has the physical tools, and we see him do these things at times. It's just a matter of like, hey, don't just have like a strong initial thrust chasing over the handoff. You have like, your job isn't done once you've done that. And sometimes it's like, ooh, I'll fight really hard and I'll deny the handoff, and then I relax, and now my guy's back cut me. Like there's like 30 battles that have to be won every defensive possession, and Ben will strongly win like 20 of them. And then at the end, like something ghastly might happen. And then it's like, you've diminished the other like 20 things that you did really well. But I think it's that standpoint. And then also just seeing what we saw during the playoffs in terms of how Tyrese was covered. We now have a better standard of what Tyrese is going to be facing. And if he's somebody who's going to be face guarded, he's going to be pressured 94 feet. It's just very valuable to have another ball handler out there. Yep. And I don't know specifically that I think that Ben's going to turn into being like a playmaking ball handler, despite the fact that I do think that he definitely would have helped them at times in the playoffs, just with his ability to punch gaps. Sometimes they needed somebody, like I said, to bring the ruckus to some of their patterned offense and be getting, to the rim, particularly in that Bucks series that showed up at times. It's like, yeah, he would have punished that a little bit more if he was standing there at the wing. But I think that's mostly where I'm at Ben. Like next year, I'm looking into it and being like, I won't be surprised if he, could be a very high level sixth man for them and hopefully solve some of the holes that they had at times, especially against certain opponents from a scoring standpoint.
All right, let me add one more point. Actually, okay, hang on. I'm not going to segue what I'm saying. First, to something you said earlier, I use PBP stats for usage rates with lineups. I don't know what you do. With TJ and Ben together, the actual leader on every Pacers player in those lineups in usage is Ben Mathurin. He's first at 27.6 in Tyrese plus Bennedict Mathurin lineups. And granted, this includes some Daniel Tyson, Jordan Nwora, who we can probably cut out of this data set. But Mathurin's usage is 19.87, so much lower in those moments. And my follow-up question is, because you brought up the postseason, is it in any way, I don't know what the right word is, frustrating, disappointing, challenging? In what way is it difficult for the Pacers to proceed to you that they did not get any Ben Mathurin in the playoffs data?
I definitely would have liked to see it. And like I said, I can see specific areas and specific matchups where after a game, I'd be like, yeah, Ben would have helped them there. That being said, I do think that there was a large enough sample size during the regular season that even against exaggerated coverages, I'm still ready to be like, that's a hang up, because I don't think that, like, when Tyrese is being hounded by Deuce McBride and top locked, I don't know what Ben does to be. He's not going to go out there as the ball handler and run a Spain pick and roll with Tyrese as the movement shooter. Like, and likewise, if you'd want to be like, okay, can Ben be the caliber of movement shooter that Buddy was to potentially, create a switch pocket for Tyrese? Like, that's why the numbers were what the numbers were, like, during the regular season. And I do think Ben has much more defensive potential than Buddy does, but I don't know if it will get actualized.
I just wanted to see it. It's just who I am. Like, I just want to know for sure, at least have like an idea, because a lot of players on the Pacers, like, was good. A good thing about them in the playoffs is either in the biggest role they've ever had or in the playoffs for the first time at all. You go, okay, yeah, it worked. Like, I get it, and you don't know anything.
I think you can project a game for Ben where it's like, hey, that's a guy who just swung that game.
Yeah, he saved
it.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's the guy that it's like you needed him as an X factor, and he went out and had a massive game.
And this is, too specific because you can't guarantee your opponents every year, but like they played two teams where specifically he was valuable in the regular season in the playoffs, right? So
Bennedict Mathurin against the Bucks was a very different version of Bennedict Mathurin.
It was. So I do wonder too what that would have looked like and how it would change what our perception of him is right this second, if at all.
There's one other thing that I do want to say about Ben in the playoffs, when I just now thought of it when you said that I would have liked to see, is the Pacers, obviously we know what happened in some of these games on the glass, rebounding wise, is could Ben up his rebounding to another level in the playoffs in the ways that we see with certain bigger wings? Like, if you think about, and I'm not comparing them perfect, these are not similar players in terms of play style, but how Paul George would up his rebounding numbers for the Pacers in the playoffs, how Andrew Wiggins upped his numbers for the Warriors rebounding wise in the playoffs. Does Ben have an extra level that he can go to on the glass? Because I looked and he was the only guard this year. I think he had 6 games where he had 6 or more defensive rebounds and nobody else was close to that. Like, there were certain ones where it looked like he was embodied by the, like the spirit of Lance Stevenson in certain particular games. So, like, if they're not going to get more rebounding from the center position than what they had, that hurt them in certain matchups, could Ben have filled some of that void? Because he feels like the most natural candidate to that for me, at least on the defensive glass.
I do agree with that. He is a good rebounder for his position. I can't quit Ben Mathurin, Kaylin. I just can't. There's so much there that is worth exploring. The problem is, this was the problem last year too, is you're trying to fit what he is into what the team is, but now it's doing that for a winning team and not a developing team. So the margins for mistakes or whatever word you want to say or glitchiness aren't there anymore. They're gone. So it'll be I think this is a very interesting season for him.
In summary, like, sometimes, players can have a somewhat rough sophomore season and have a big breakout third year. Like, that's Scotty Barnes, for instance. Not that they're similar, but I do want to wrap this up and say one thing that I should have said when we were talking about Ben Sheppard. I see a lot of comments a lot of time in my mention that Rick hates rookies and rookies don't play, and he has a short leash with rookies. And I just want to, I wrote an article about this during the playoffs, especially because of some of the stuff that was going on with Jarris this year. And it doesn't apply universally, but Andrew Nembhard started 60-plus games as a rookie. Ben Sheppard was in the rotation, albeit after they had moved Buddy and after other changes were made. But in the playoffs against the Bucks, when they trimmed that rotation to 8, Ben Sheppard was still in the 8-man rotation. Ben Sheppard was into the starting lineup for 2 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. So if you quote-unquote earn the playing time, as Nembhard and Sheppard predominantly did starting on the defensive end, Rick didn't hesitate to play them. So
the problem is that Jarris wasn't playing 30 minutes a game in crucial moments of the season. I'll never forget what Rick said to me. Justin Anderson was on the Pacers for that brief moment. This is a real thing that happened. And I read a story about Justin Anderson, and that was that Rick Carlisle trusted him to play in the playoffs, which was very unusual for Rick. And so I was asking him about that and when he kind of changed to be able to play Ben Mathurin as much as he was. He said, well, I played Luka a lot, didn't I? I was like, okay, well, he's evolved certainly as a coach when it comes to rookies. So seared memory of a bad question from yours truly.
Oh, no.
Thank you, Rick. I don't have nothing else to add about the Bens unless you do.
I don't either, except for every time we say that, I think we're going to get the Bens as like scuba divers. Hopefully people didn't think that by the time they listened to this whole episode.
For a second, I thought they were going to go by Ben was Mathurin and Shep was Sheppard, and that didn't happen. They've become Ben and Ben, even though Bennedict said he goes by Bennedict after he was drafted. This has become very confusing very quickly, but they are the Bens.
It does. I do remember him saying that he went as Bennedict, and then like everybody refers to him as Ben.
Well, the problem, so now we're off the rails, so I'll just explain this. The problem is that when you're playing basketball and you're communicating, you need everyone's name to be as short as possible so you could say it fast. So it had to be Ben, right? Like we all knew it was going to become.
That reminds me of a trivia question that I did when I was on the Athletics NBA show, where they asked pretty much everybody, like they quizzed them about Basketball Reference nicknames, and they come up with fake ones, and one of the fake ones was Eggs for Ben.
For Ben.
So there's a shorter way.
That's a good one. They should have said Samurai Myles to see if anyone else who wasn't in the lore of the 2019 Pacers would have gotten it.
I think they did. I think that was one of the ones that was up there, but
I can't believe that it got onto Basketball Reference. I thought that was just such a niche, dorky Twitter thing, and it got all the way up the ladder. So the power we have, Kaylin, the power we have. Our next one of these will be date to be determined, players to be determined. So that's a very interesting tease into our
exciting
review. Caitlin, I forgot to do this last time, and that's why I was upset after I clicked stop recording. I would like you to do your marketing this time. Where can people find you and your work covering the Pacers and broader NBA topics?
Well, if you're watching it on YouTube, my handle is right there. If you're not and you're listening to it audio, at C2_Cooper, if you go there, the link to my Patreon's there, patreon.com/basketball she wrote. I'm doing these player reviews with written blurbs extending on some of the things that we're showing in the clips. And then I have another project that I've been working on for a couple weeks that I'm hoping will come to fruition soon. So that's in the offing.
I'm excited. If you're on YouTube or if you're on a computer listening, the description of the episode also has the link to that. So the easiest way to get there if you just want to copy paste. I will be back tomorrow talking with Alex Golden about Pacers free agency topics du jour. Caitlin will be back later this week, and the 5th episode, figure it out when the time comes. Check out Locked On NBA for more on the finals. 2-0 Celtics. Turns out they're pretty good, Caitlin, and hard to beat. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day.